So tonight we have Kelli Bergheimer. She's going to be speaking about sorting your DNA match list. She is a writer, teacher, editor, and international genealogical speaker. She has a bachelor's in biology, a master's in education, curriculum and instruction, and in business management. She works as the director of education for Your DNA Guide, which is a DNA business. She also runs a small business called Mess on the Desk, a genealogical organization company with a YouTube channel. And she's a member of the Association of Professional Genealogists and the Genealogical Speakers Guild. So we are going to let her take it away.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Sarah. It's great to be here tonight. I have a special place in my heart for the Allen County Public Library and Genealogy Center there. We're going to talk about sorting your DNA match lists, and this is something near and dear to my heart because as soon as I learned how to do this, I was able to make leaps and bounds in my research. So we're going to talk about a few things here tonight that are kind of basic concepts that lead us up to sorting. And then we're going to talk a little bit more about sorting. So just to introduce myself a little bit, I love genealogy. I do have a DNA interest group that is free. And if you're interested, I'll tell you about that at the end. Also, most of my family's been in Ohio for 205 years. That's crazy, right? But we are a very sedentary folk and we like to stay in the state of Ohio. And I work for a company called Blue Kayak, but I also have to disclose that I work as a director of education for Your DNA Guide, which is a DNA company that's run by Diane Southard. And so professionally, I need to disclose that. So what we're going to do tonight, our goal is to learn some techniques and tools to understand our company match lists, learn a little bit about the Shared Centimorgan Project and the importance of descendancy research and tree completeness. And then we're going to talk about the Leeds method, which is the method that I like to use to sort DNA match lists. It's not the only way to sort, but it's one of the best ways to sort. So if you have questions tonight as we're going, make sure you put your questions in the Q&A string, not the chat string. Go to the Q&A string. And then if we have time at the end, we'll do a few questions then. Okay, so I want you to think about DNA. It's really important when you're working on a DNA research question to just pause and think. I think a lot of us as genealogists, we like to just jump right in. But it's important for us to kind of go down a trail with DNA analysis, but not be afraid to set it aside, go a different way, come at it from a different perspective, consider what are the DNA tests that were needed to solve the problem, and consider the traditional approach needed to solve the problem. DNA doesn't happen in a vacuum. It's one evidence point. It is not the entirety of what you're doing. So you have to be using records and collections and documents and photos and censuses, all those things you still need to do DNA analysis. So when you're talking about DNA company match lists, we're going to talk about specifically how to do the Leeds method in a minute. But really what you need is that match list and either a spreadsheet or a piece of paper or a table or however you want to do this electronically, if you want to do it electronically. We're going to go over how to do this in a minute. But your DNA match list is going to be what you're looking for in terms of sorting. I'm going to show you how to do that and the most efficient way to do it to split your genetic networks. So we're going to talk about 5 major concepts that impact your understanding of sorting and why it's important. And also these 5 will help you to make progress in your research. So we're going to talk about what are shared segments, what are default relationships, the Shared Centimorgan Project, the importance of descendancy research, and the importance of tree completeness. So those are the 5 pieces that you need to understand why you're sorting the way you're sorting and what it all means. So let's start with shared segments. So we have 22 pair of autosomes and 1 pair of sex chromosomes, either XX or XY. XX if for female, XY if for male. The amount of shared segments we have with a match is an indicator of how closely related someone is to us. And we measure those shared segments in centimorgans. The testing companies assign a category for our match that is a default category, but we need to verify those relationships, even our close ones. So is your first cousin really your first cousin, or are they a half first cousin? So we need to verify even the close ones. So it's important to understand the testing companies give us those default categories. They're not necessarily the actual category. So shared segments have to do with how much you share in common with other people, and those categories of cousins lead us back to particular most recent common ancestors. That's what MRCA is. So my first cousins share a grandparent or two grandparents with me. My second cousins share first great grandparent or first great grandparent couple with me. So that's how we determine how we're related to people and which level we're related at. Diane Southard calls it the generation of connection. Where do we connect that cousin level back to that ancestral level? So this chart's in your handout, and that should help you remember which cousins you're looking at that inform which level of grandparent. So shared centimorgans, let's talk for a little bit about the parameters. Sometimes with DNA analysis, it is really difficult to wrap your head around all the numbers. And so our parent-child relationship is about 3,450 to 3,500 centimorgans. So if this is from my DNA list, so you can see John, April, Kylie, Casey, Corey. So my father is John, my mother is April, my daughter is Kylie, my two sons are Corey and Casey. But they're all in that parent-child category. Now I've changed my dad's category to father. I actually changed that for another presentation and I didn't change it back. But the default is parent-child. And so how do you know which is the parent and which is the child? Now, as a female, I know which children I gave birth to. But as a male, you might see someone in your parent-child list that you didn't know was your biological child, for example. So DNA really does require more evidence than just centimorgan shared. Identical twin or triplets, I have identical twins, Casey and Corey. They have 100% shared DNA, and they will show up in the category at Ancestry as twin or self. Now, why do you think they have that self category? Well, that's because some people test more than once. And so sometimes they do just match themselves. I don't know why people test more than once. Your DNA doesn't change, but people do. And so they have that category as self or twin. This is really the only true relationship, identical multiples, that you can say DNA proves without any other evidence. Other than that, everything else needs other evidence. This is my brother and sister, and I have up in the upper right corner my sister Jody, my brother Todd, and you can see how much DNA we share. But what I have below that is what MyHeritage has as their chromosome browser that shows what segments my sister and I share in pink, what my brother and I share in orange. And then what MyHeritage does is they have an additional step where they put a circle around those segments that they call triangulated, which means that all three of us have those particular pieces end to end in common. And so I just wanted to show you that to give you an example of how much overlap there is, but also how much difference there is in siblings. So my sister and I share pink, my brother and I share orange, and you can see even on chromosome number 1, my sister and I share a little bit more DNA than my brother and I do on chromosome 1. So there's lots of things you can find out from shared segments, but at Ancestry, we don't have that segment information. We can also do share segments in DNA Painter, the chromosome browser. So I'm just showing you some different ways to think about segments in common. So for example, this is chromosome number 10, and you can see that there are some places here where I have cousins who share about the same length of segment with me. And so those are cousins where I need to go back and look for a most recent common ancestor that connects us. And so that's the concept behind shared segments. And of course, Ancestry, again, does not give us that data, but the other testing companies, most of them do. It's important to understand that our DNA testing companies are giving us what are called default relationships. So when I open up my match list, I have 7 people in my first to second cousin category. So are they first cousins? Are they second cousins? Are they some other relationship? I need to figure that out, right? So I'm going to use the Shared Centimorgan Project. That is also a free tool available at DNA Painter to find the possibilities for these relationships. So I'm just going to show you the high and low. So the highest match I have is a match with the initial A, and we share 853 centimorgans. And the lowest match in that category is 406. Now pay attention to that, because 400 is an important point, an important pivot point in DNA analysis, and we'll talk about that when we do the Leeds method. So just remember 400 centimorgans. That's a big one. So we're going to use the Shared Centimorgan Project, and we're going to put 853 into the Shared Centimorgan Project. I apologize for my voice. I'm still recovering from losing my voice at Roots Tech last week. So it's a lot better than it was. So thank goodness for that. So when I put 853 centimorgans in the Shared Centimorgan Project, what does it show at the bottom for probability of relationships? So it shows that there's a 97% chance that this is a great-grandparent, great-aunt, half-aunt, first cousin, half-niece. I'm only reading the female ones because she's female. Great-niece, great-grandchild. So those 97% probability, that's one of those. Now, that doesn't mean first cousin or second cousin necessarily are the only two options. It could be any of those. And there's a 3% chance that it's one of the ones that's listed below that. So we've got some work to do. So the chart will light up as you scroll down. What it highlights are the possible relationships. So when Ancestry or any of the testing companies are saying that this person matches you as a first to second cousin level, it's any one of these highlighted ones is possible. Now, some of them might not be genealogically possible. So for example, if this first cousin matched to me, if I am 58 years old and this match is 64 years old, she's not my great-grandparent. So I can rule out that she's my great-grandchild. There are some that I can rule out based on our ages and things like that, that won't be genealogically possible. But genetically, these are all the possible relationships that highlight here. So I just want to let you know that, so that you're not thinking that those folks in that list are all first cousins or all second cousins. They're not. Now, if I check the lowest value, remember that lowest match I had was 406. And again, I get a chart of probabilities. And if I scroll down, it highlights the possibilities. What do you notice about 406? Well, the lower you go down on the chart, the more possibilities highlight, the more possibilities there are for relationships to you. So this is the actual relationship for these 7 people. I have 7 matches and I've listed their shared centimorgans, and Ancestry is saying that they're first to second cousins by default, but I actually have 5 half first cousins and I have 2 full first cousins twice removed. I don't actually have any full first cousins. I don't actually have any full second cousins in this list. So it's really important, even for your close matches, even for those cousins that you have Thanksgiving dinner with every year, that you actually identify and look at the amount of centimorgans they share with you. Don't assume that they are a full match if they're a half match, right? So those are important things for your analysis. And in case you're wondering about what's a full first cousin twice removed, it means that the first cousin is how I'm related to them through my first cousin, but it's 2 more generations above or below that level. So it's probably a first cousin's grandchild. That's typically what it is. It could be an older person as well. Okay, you can draw out the relationships that you have with all of these cousins. So you can see there over on the very bottom, there's half first cousins on my dad's side, and then those 2 first cousin twice removed are on my mom's side. And so I use a program that's called Lucid Chart. And there's a free side and a pay side, like most of our DNA tools and most of our productivity tools. So there is a free side that has a limited number of things you can do. But this is something that I do sometimes to picture the relationships. So for descendancy research, it's really important for you when you're trying to identify your DNA matches is that you have a very complete descendancy tree. Now, this is kind of contrary to what we normally do in genealogy, because normally we're going back in time. We're looking for greats and great greats and third greats and so on. And we're looking to build back in time. We're looking for immigrant ancestors. We're looking for who jumped the pond or things like that. And so descendancy research is different than that. It has to do with finding siblings at every level and then working your way forward in time. So it's actually the opposite of what we've been doing in our traditional genealogy. But if you have a very robust, what I call fat and wide tree that goes down to recent times, you're going to have better time connecting those DNA matches to your tree. So how can you identify cousins today? The easiest thing to do is find your grandparents, siblings, and their children and grandchildren, your great-grandparents' siblings, and their children and grandchildren, and keep working your way back so that you have that robust kind of fat and wide tree. That's the goal, to be able to identify who are the DNA testers today who have tested who link you back to first or second or third great grandparents. So you want to have that robust tree. So always be working on that. So your descendancy research, when you think about it, if you've got you and your mom and your dad, when you're looking for cousin matches, it might be that you have these four grandparents, but maybe your DNA match is mom's brother's child. Well, if you don't have mom's brother in your tree and you don't know he has a child, then you may not know who he is. And remember, we're not necessarily going off of names all the time. We can't always do that. Or maybe it's your grandfather, your paternal grandfather's grandchild. So one of his siblings. So your paternal grandfather's brother or sister and one of their descendants. So your DNA matches are going to be those siblings, children, and grandchildren. And so you want to really work on your tree. And then let's just say the last thing we're going to talk about in terms of those basic things that you need in order to be successful with DNA and to be successful in understanding sorting is tree completeness. So a surname in common doesn't mean that's where your DNA relationship is. So my maiden name is Reed. And just because I have Reeds who are in my DNA match list doesn't mean that we match in the Reed lines. We could match in a completely different way, or we could match in the Reeds and in another way. So we could have a multiple relationship. So the surnames really are a clue, but they're not necessarily definitive. Now, of course, the closer it is to you, the easier that makes it. So if they're a first cousin or second cousin and there's some names in common, that's a lot of pretty good evidence that you can work with. But if they're a third or fourth or fifth cousin and they have a name in common with your tree, that doesn't necessarily mean that's where your DNA relatedness is. You may have multiple relationships there too. So some of your matches could be adopted or misattributed parentage. So really surnames aren't going to matter. If you go down in your list and you see names of people and you don't recognize those names, people are using maiden names, married names, they have adopted family names. They may not even know that they're adopted. And so you're going to see people's names in your list and you're not going to recognize them, some of them. And beyond third cousins, matches really need a lot more evidence to prove how they're related to you. And there's been a lot of discussion and a lot of Facebook groups and blogs and things like that about segments and small segments. There's plenty of places that you can learn more about segments. We're really not focusing too much on that tonight. We're focusing on shared matching and sorting. But when it comes to segments, just keep in mind that if you share more than one segment with someone, you can possibly be related to them in more than one line of your family. So if you and I share 3 segments of DNA, we could actually be related through 3 different lines in our family, have 3 lines in common. So it's important to remember that all the DNA you share with someone isn't necessarily attributable to one ancestral couple. So that's an important concept to keep in mind. How much of your tree is complete really directly impacts your ability to identify matches, or maybe I should say your quick ability to identify your matches. And also it affects the ability to have a stronger conclusion that you're only related through that one most recent common ancestral couple. So those are really important concepts. If you're wondering about some of these and you're still a little bit confused and you're like, what is she talking about? There are plenty of places to get more education, and I have a slide about that at the end. So, and especially keep coming to this DNA group and come in person to Fort Wayne to their DNA group. I'm glad you guys are starting to meet again in person. That's great. I wish I lived a little closer. This is a tool in DNA Painter, and I've mentioned DNA Painter 3 times now. I've talked about looking at segments. I've talked about the Shared Centimorgan Project, and this is their tree tool. And what this shows on the right is the female part of my family. So my mom is that first yellow loop, and my dad is that first blue loop, and then it works its way out. And so this is showing many, many generations. But what I want you to notice, the visual here, is all the gray. If you go all around the circumference of this and you look at all that gray, those are all ancestors that I don't have any idea who they are, and they're not in my tree. So I don't have a lot of tree completeness. I have completeness of my parents, my grandparents, my greats, and my second greats. My third greats, I'm pretty sure, but by my fourth greats, I have a lot of gaps. Now, let me just also say that tree completeness is based on the accuracy of your tree too, right? So in 2017, I found out that my dad's dad is not his dad. I'm sure a lot of you have had that kind of a common story, right? So I found out that my grandfather that I grew up knowing and I thought was my grandfather biologically is not. So what does that mean about my tree? Well, that means 25% of my tree is wrong in terms of biology. Now, that man is still important. He's still an important part of my family. He's still my half first cousin's grandfather, but he's not my grandfather biologically. So I have a lot more work to do in my tree every time I discover that I've got somebody in the wrong place and then everybody further back is in the wrong spot. So tree completeness is kind of an evolving thing, but the DNA Painter tree tool can help you visualize, wow, here's where I need to do a lot of work. So we're going to talk, there are several ways to sort. We're going to talk about the Leeds method tonight, but I want you to be thinking that there are other ways to do this. I work for Diane Southard, and she does a dot method and best known match. And so she has a unique way that she does sorting in her book and workbook and courses. I teach mostly on the Leeds method, which is sorting everyone in your list in a certain range to come up with those grandparent lines. There are also some companies that have clustering tools. So for example, if you have DNA at MyHeritage, through the 10th of this month, so I believe that's Sunday, MyHeritage, you can transfer your raw DNA from the other testing companies, and they will waive the unlock fee of $29 on all of the tools. They originally had that set to expire this week. They've extended it, I believe, through the 10th, but don't wait, do it now if you want to use MyHeritage's tool. And they have clustering tools there. Clustering is the same concept as sorting in a different visual format. Also, inferred matching has to do with layering in some siblings and looking at all the matches of all the siblings. And so at the end, I will tell you a little bit about my YouTube channel, and you can go there and learn a little bit more about clustering or inferred matching if you want. Or you can Google those and find plenty of other resources to learn about those. So the Leeds method was originated by Dana Leeds, who is an actual person, and she has a website, and there's some great resources there. She is often on Facebook answering questions and in Blaine Bettinger's group, the Genetic Genealogy Tips and Techniques. So there are plenty of ways that you can find out more information about the Leeds method. She has a blog, so there's some great, great stuff out there. It's been around for a few years, but let me just go through some of the beginner things that are related to the Leeds method and show you how to do a chart. But this is being recorded, and you might want to go back and pause me and try it, and then unpause and then try the next step. So it's not meant to be like a follow along and do it right now kind of thing. So, but I want you to watch this and see what the power of it is. And it's dividing all of your match list into grandparent lines. So it's very powerful. So it starts with that Shared Centimorgan Project at DNA Painter. It really does originate there. And so first cousins are right at that 400 level. Remember before when I said 400 is an important number? For the Leeds method, 400 is about the bottom of that first cousin category. So it's the beginning of your second cousin category in general. Now, second cousins can share a little more, a little less. Remember, these are ranges of relationships. But for the Leeds method, we're going to use 400 as a pivotal piece of our puzzle. So what we're going to do is we're going to build a spreadsheet of the list of matches. Now, most of our testing companies right now have disabled downloading match lists, and Ancestry has actually never had downloading of match lists. There were a couple of third-party things that would scrape data that became illegal and whatever, we'll just ignore that. But you're going to have to build your own chart if you're working with Ancestry, and you're going to have to build your own chart. So 400 is that pivotal spot. And you'll notice I have at the bottom 90. 90 is a pivotal spot as well. So we're going to put all of our matches in from Ancestry or whatever testing company you want to use. This works at every company, but I just chose Ancestry because most people are using Ancestry. But if the category is second to third cousin, I put their usernames in, and I put the amount of centimorgans they share. And remember, we're listing from 400 down to 90. We don't need the ones above. We don't need the ones below. We'll layer those in later, but we're not going to do them initially. This is the range that will give us, hopefully, 4 groups, and those 4 groups will correspond to each of our 4 grandparents. Now, there are some times that this won't work, and we'll talk about that. But for the vast majority of us, it works pretty well. So 490, those are our 2 pivotal numbers that you need to remember. This is the range for the Leeds method. This gives us our 4 grandparent lines, hopefully. It doesn't always, but hopefully. So I'm going to look at my first match. So my first match is KA, and we share 251 centimorgans. So can everyone see that in the list? KA, 251 centimorgans. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the matches that my husband has with KA. This is my husband's match list. So I'm going to look at Christopher, my husband, and I'm going to look at his matches with KA in the shared matches tool. And then what I get is this list of people starting with J, and then there's another J. I've kind of redacted names because I don't have the ability to share all their names, and we have to privatize and things, but hopefully you can still kind of follow along. So in my husband's match list, I chose KA, that first match, and I did shared matches. Do you see right here in the center where it has shared matches? So most of us spend time on trees and ethnicity, and we don't spend time on shared matches. I recommend that you do the opposite. You start with shared matches, you do your Leeds chart, you do the pure sciencey thing that doesn't require any analysis, and then you go back and look at trees and ethnicity. So what we're going to do is we're going to shared matches. We're going to come back and look at trees and ethnicity later. Now, we're not going to do that tonight, but that's what you're going to do on yours. But we want to sort all the matches and then analyze. So let me show you how we do that on a chart. So we've got KA. So what we're going to do is we're going to choose her being the first person in group 1, and we're going to put an X in that box. And again, you can do this on paper, in sheets, in whatever, any kind of Excel, any kind of spreadsheet, you can do this. So we're going to choose KA to be kind of our group leader, and we put an X there. And then we're going to choose a color for that group. So I usually just go in order that the colors are in Excel. So I do red, orange, yellow, green. So they're in this particular order just because I'm boring. You can make it color coded. You can do whatever you want with the colors. Okay, so then we're going to look at all the shared matches that we have with KA. So we're going to go back here to this shared match list, and everyone who is a shared match all the way down to 90, we're going to label in red. And so this first J and that next J on our chart, we're going to go all the way down. We're going to keep going down till we get to 90. And all those folks, we're going to give them a red color. So can you see in group 1 that we have KA, then we have J, then we have J, then we have 3 J's in a row. Then we have someone who shares 132 with the letter D. So we've got a group forming. This first group shares an ancestor with us. We may not know which one yet, but they share an ancestor with us. So the whole purpose of sorting, just like if you had 4 jars and you had those Legos and you sort by color, it's going to give you those 4 grandparent lines. And I say hopefully, because for most of you it will, for some of you it won't. And we're going to talk about some of those tougher cases too. So don't lose heart. All right, so now that we're done with our first group from 400 down to 90, we're going to look at the next person who does not have a color. So the next person who does not have a color, who's not in group 1, is W, who shares 224 with my husband. So we're going to click on W's match list. We're going to choose W, and we're going to go to his shared matches. And then we're going to look at all the shared matches, and those are going to be group 2. And we're going to add a color and color all the shared matches. So we're just going to repeat what we did in group 1. Now, I know I'm saying this a little bit fast, but it's not a workshop where we're going to try it and wait and try it and wait. We're just going to kind of go over it, and then you can go back and watch the recording and pause me if you want. So in the second column, group 2, we're going to have W. He's going to be our group leader. So we put the X there so we don't forget who our group leader was. And I just chose orange. You can choose any color you want. And then everyone in the shared match list who matches him is going to be colored orange. So now we have 2 groups. Now we have 2 groups. So I want you to look at this for a second, and I want you to think, who's the next person who doesn't have a color? You know, when you're thinking about horizontally in rows, can you spot the next person who doesn't have a color? It's the 115 match who starts with the letter P. Do you see that? He has no color assigned yet. So what is he going to be? He's going to be group 3. He's going to be our group leader in group 3. And so we do the same thing with 3, and then we do the same thing with 4, and we keep on going, however many groups we need to do. And then we want to look at what we have. So everyone here has at least one color, right? If you look horizontally, every single row has a color or 2 colors, or I'll show you some in a little bit that have a lot more colors, but everybody has a color assigned between that 400 down to 90. So this is the sorting that we've done, and now we need to figure out, what does that mean? Okay, so the important concept here, you have 4 groups. Now what? Are they distinct? So let's talk about what distinct means. And there are some matches above that X match, that specific match you started with, that are shared, and it's fine to give them that color. Sometimes you're going to have 5 or 6 or 10 or 12 groups. It just depends on your particular family, your match list, a lot of factors, and I'll show you some examples of that. Because one thing is, when you come to webinars and you see something that looks really nice and neat, and then you go home and do yours and you're like, mine doesn't look like that. So I'm going to show you a few of the problematic ones too, just so that you feel like, okay, I've seen a pretty good sample. So I want you to look at these, and I want you to think about what we mean by distinct groups. So group 1 in red doesn't have overlap with any other color. Do you see the people who have red don't overlap anybody else. They don't overlap orange, they don't overlap yellow, they don't overlap green. So they are what we call a distinct group. So group 1 is a grandparent line. Group 2 and 3 have some overlap. Can you see that match at 144? And I've got it kind of both columns highlighted here. 144 shares orange and yellow. So there's some overlap between the orange and yellow. What does that mean? Well, that means that orange and yellow are the same group that go back to one grandparent. If there's overlap, they're the same group, and you need to treat them all that they're the same ancestor you're looking for. Then we've got the green group. Is there any overlap in the green group with any of the other groups? No, there's only 2 matches there. That might not be so helpful, we'll see, but there's 2 matches there, but there's no overlap. So group 4 is another grandparent. Now think about this. We've got group 1 is a grandparent. Group 2 and 3 are a grandparent. Group 4 is a grandparent. How many grandparents do we have? We have 4 grandparents, right? So where's our 4th grandparent? So this is the first kind of common problem that happens. So we're going to come back to that question in just a minute. So I use this chart not only to sort, but I use this for all kinds of information. I write notes about people's trees. I mark them as maternal, paternal, according to Ancestry's tools and some of those other things. And I'm writing notes and things as I go. So this is a real working document for me. And then if I decide I'm going to do the same thing for my husband at MyHeritage or 23andMe or any of the other testing companies, I just add a tab to the spreadsheet and I just do it again and I do it again. So I'm building these kinds of things all the time for my match lists. So let's talk about a couple of things. In addition to adding those maternal, paternal, do you have any guess about who's who? Let's think about what else do I know? Well, this one cousin, M, you can see at 125. That's the only cousin in the list that I think I've worked out genealogically who she is. And I call her a Mat-Pat cousin. So she's my husband's mother's father's side. That's what Mat-Pat means, maternal, paternal. So she's my husband's mother's father's side. And so what I'm going to assume for now is that my husband's mother's father's side, their last name is Kinane. It's an Irish surname. The Kinanes are the red group because this match, cousin M at 125, is a Kinane match. And so I can go with some assumptions here until it's disproven that those group 1 are the Kinanes. That's one of his grandparents. Okay, so I'm just putting in the things that I know, and I may not know anything, and that's okay. So you may have 4 distinct groups or 3, and you don't even know who they are. But let's talk about a couple of other things related to this. So after you do the 400s down to the 90s, you want to look for that overlap in the group. You want to look at trees, and I can't demonstrate this part, but you want to try to connect each person in the orange and yellow group together. You want to try to connect those 2 matches in the green together to figure out which side of your family, which grandparent line it is. You're going to go draw trees for other people. That's what you're going to do because they're not going to reply to your messages. It doesn't matter how many times you message people. So you're just going to have to do that grunt work of building their trees. And I usually build out to the 1st or 2nd great grandparent because that's the range I'm looking at. See if there are some names or locations in common, connect those trees together. And I'm really just giving you a strategy here that is a lot more steps, but just an overall of what you can do with this list after you've done your initial sort. But let's talk about what those groups mean, because this is an important thing to keep in mind. So we would expect someone with 4 unique grandparents to have 4 unique groups. We didn't get that with my husband. So why is that? We only have 3 groups. So we can hypothesize maybe why that happened. So my husband has a German immigrant grandfather that's recent, and it's not represented in the database. So that grandfather who came to America in 19 teens, there aren't descendants in the database to form a network to represent him yet. That's something to keep in mind, is that you might have recent immigrant ancestry, and that particular immigrant ancestor is just not there in the database. There aren't testers to represent that group. So that could be the reason why. The red is one group, and then the orange and yellow group together are likely the two maternal ones. Remember, the red was the maternal paternal side. I believe that orange and yellow group are the, okay, my husband's mother's mother, so maternal line. Sorry for all the pat mats and all that. There are two different lines there representing my husband's mother's side. Then we have the green group, and I'm hypothesizing at the moment that that is my husband's likely German grandmother who was in the US another generation earlier. So there are a couple of matches there that might match that German grandmother line. So, but this is just a hypothesis that the German grandfather, the Bergheimer grandfather's missing, but the Kaufman grandmother is probably there in green. And then the other two lines are representing his mother's lines. But that's just a hypothesis. I have to prove it. I have to connect them to each other. I have to build trees, and I have to see if I can figure it out. The missing group is likely that German immigrant grandfather line. That's what I'm going to go with to begin with. But anything that involves science, you have to be willing to step back and say, you know what, I might need to revise this hypothesis. So now, I mentioned this earlier, but let me just reiterate, you can add another testing company matches. So I add a tab in Excel for MyHeritage, or make your own paper chart for MyHeritage. Make another chart for 23andMe, taking out the amount of subtracting the X shared DNA. 23andMe adds the X in, the other testing companies don't, so you'll get a closer representation. Living DNA, family tree DNA, any place that gives you those match lists, you can do this kind of sorting. So I just want to encourage you, it's not just for ancestry. So let me show you some other oddball cases, because anytime you attend a webinar that you don't want to just see the pretty case, that works pretty well. You want to see some other weird things. So here's one. And notice these are all matches between 400 down to 90. It's a lot, right? So I just want you to be thinking about, some of you are going to have a lot more matches than others. Some of us are going to have 5 matches in that range. Some are going to have 200. So just keep all this in mind as you're working your way through yours. This is why you need to go to the websites, look at other people's examples and that sort of thing to kind of get an idea. But when we talk about grandparent lines, I want you to notice here, I've just copied it over so that I can show you. I've grouped this with the overlap. Do you see that orange, teal, and purple have overlap? Some of the matches have 2 colors, some have 3. That's one grandparent line. This other set of 3 columns has overlap. That is a second grandparent line. This last set of 3 has some overlap. That is a third grandparent line. And then lastly, that green group is its own grandparent line. So we've got 4 distinct grandparent lines here. Even though we ended up with, how many is that, 10 groups? We ended up with 10 groups, but with the overlap, we're grouping together the groups. So if there's overlap, they're all treated as one group that lead you back to one ancestor, one grandparent line. So just keep that in mind. You may end up with a lot of groups, but look for the overlap. You can rearrange the columns like I did here in Excel, or you could kind of make yourself some notes about which ones belong to which ones, but there are 4 distinct lines here. This is my half first cousin, and you notice he doesn't have very many matches. And he has kind of a high sharing match of 412. I don't normally include the 412 in the chart, but I did because it's a significant match to a problem we were solving. But he's got very few matches, and he again has 3 groups because he has a recent immigrant ancestor line. So that's just another example there of where that happens. Also, this is my daughter-in-law. So my daughter-in-law is Mexican. And so she has what's called endogamy. It's when people live in the same teeny tiny town or they're of the same religious group and they intermarry a lot. So look at these groups here. I want you to just kind of just look at this visual for a minute. So these are my daughter-in-law's matches between 400 down to 90. Do you see where that 229 match is all the way across, right? That person's in group 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Most of the people are in 2 groups, 3 groups, 4 groups, or all 5. So what does that mean? Well, that means that you have either one of 3 things: endogamy, multiple relationship, or pedigree collapse. Now, in our discussion time tonight, we don't have a whole lot of time to go into all the differentiation there, but this is a Mexican group that lives in Jalisco. They intermarried for many, many, many generations. The same surnames are showing up over and over and over and over. And so this is truly endogamy. If you have Ashkenazi Jew, if you have Amish, if you have island populations like Filipino or something like that, you're going to see a lot of this endogamy. So what that means is it's very difficult to sort the matches, and you're going to have to go to a different kind of analysis. Now, after you've done all of this and you've shown that you have endogamy, then you know, okay, now I have endogamy. So now I got to switch to some different strategies. And so there are all kinds of endogamous groups: Cajuns, French Canadians, Samoans, all kinds of groups. So you may find that 1 or 2 of your lines have this problem, or you may see in my daughter-in-law's case that all of her lines have this problem. Now, does this represent all 4 of her grandparents? Well, that's a different question. I don't know. How many people in Jalisco, where her father lives, have tested versus how many people in the US, where her mom lives, have tested? So maybe this is just the US group, and this is just her mother's endogamous group and not necessarily even representing her father. I don't know. I've got more work to do, right? So at least it'll give me an idea of what to do next. This is my son, his group between 400 down to 90, and you'll see I've included the higher matches as well. But let me just show you a couple of things here. My son has what broke out into 6 different groups. And what shows here is a split in great-grandparents. So let me show you a couple of things. I think I've got, yeah, a chart here. So the red group is his father's grandfather, grandmother. So, and then the Neils and the Goalies are another group that I haven't split yet on his father's side. But on my side, I can split all 4 of those groups into my grandparents, my son's great-grandparents. Because I know so much about my tree, so much about the descendants, so much about who's who, I'm able to really clearly identify great-grandparents from this chart. But I can't separate my first husband's lines because he never DNA tested. He passed away in 2004 before over-the-counter testing was a thing. And so really we only have my DNA test and my children's to sort this out. We don't have their father. So there's more work to do, right? Because I can get my son's networks down to 4 great-grandparents on my side, but there's more work to do on his dad's side. So what else can you do to solve these kind of problems? Before we get to the kind of the question and answer section, I just want to give you some like next steps, what to do next. So once you have your Leeds charts and you've got groups identified, whether you've got 3 groups or 6 groups or unique groups or some overlap, I want you to go to through lines, and I want you to work on through lines if you're at Ancestry. Build trees for those matches. So everybody, let's say in that red group that matched my husband and matched KA, everybody in that red group who is a Canadian, probably because they matched that one match we know, everybody in that group, let's start building all their trees and connect them all to each other. And then add them into our tree. That's our goal, right? To identify them and to add them all into our tree. So you're going to have to build other people's trees. I have actually never reached out to a match to ask them how they're related to me. I just try to figure it out. And I just don't waste time on the message boards because, it's frustrating. They don't email back and, they don't message back. So I don't even bother. I just start building trees. I use some people searching tools. I go on Facebook. I look for usernames. There's all kinds of things you can do to try to identify your matches. I connect that network together. And if I don't know where I fit in that network, like if I haven't figured out, maybe it's an unknown grandparent, or maybe it's an adoption, and I don't know which parent is which and all of that, then you could try the tool, the what are the odds tool, the WATO tool, to see where you fit and come up with some analysis there. So there are some tools for those unknown cases. That's a little bit more advanced, certainly more advanced than tonight. But I'm sure that a lot of DNA groups, there's a lot of webinars about that. But keep an eye out for surnames and location, location, location. Because what do we know about conception? Two people have to be in the same place at the same time. And so locations are going to be pivotal to your research. So I want to just mention a few things that you can do for more education, and then we'll take some questions. So more education, keep attending this group. The Allen County Public Library, the Genealogy Center is amazing. So all of their programming and their Genealogical Society for the Allen County chapter is amazing as well. Keep attending this group, keep going to DNA interest groups. Roots Tech just happened last week, but there's a huge archive of programming there. And so go there, watch some programs. They have archives of years past as well. So make use of that. Legacy Family Tree webinars is the best $49 a year I spend. To be honest, I go there every week. I watch something. I watch them live. Sometimes I watch them later. If you're a member, you get access to all their handouts. It's an amazing resource. And if you're new to DNA, make sure that you check out the Beginner DNA series that Blaine Bettinger has, and get his book out of the local library. So Legacy Family Tree webinars, that Blaine Bettinger, I think it's a 5-part beginner series on DNA, is excellent. It's a great place to start. So if this was a little bit beyond where you are and you still don't understand a lot of the concepts, that's a good place to start. I will be at the Ohio Genealogical Society conference. That's where I live in Ohio. And so if you're going to make the trip from wherever you are to Ohio to that conference, I'm excited to see you in April. So come up and say hi. Conference Keeper is an amazing resource. So Conference Keeper is an email list that you can subscribe to. You can just Google Conference Keeper and you get a weekly email. Usually it comes in Saturday night, Sunday, sometime in the weekend. And it outlines all the new things they have that are available. It'll tell you if it's free. It'll tell you if there's a cost. It's about conferences, societies, special interest groups, military groups, all kind of stuff. You're going to want to follow Conference Keeper. I work for a DNA company called Your DNA Guide with Diane Southard, and she is amazing. And I'm the director of education there. We have courses. We have a study group that meets twice a month. We also have a number of free webinars and resources. So go to their site. Let me just mention our study group. We register once a year and we start that in the first week of April. So you only have a couple more weeks to sign up for that. So that one's timely. But there are other courses that we run year round. We have a skills course, a Y-DNA course, and an endogamy course. And so you might want to check those out and you'll see me on the message boards and in the meetings and stuff for those. And then finally, if you're interested in my DNA group, Genetics, Genealogy, and You is a group that I run on third Sunday nights. It's not always DNA topics, but as we talked about in the very beginning, not all of DNA analysis is about DNA. Sometimes we have to go to traditional records and things like that. Sometimes we do forensics topics. There's a lot of different things that we do. Third Sundays, 5 to 7 Eastern. It's free. It's on Zoom. And you just need to email me and I can add you to that list. There's no cost to it. You can show up when you want, not show up when you want. It's kind of like one of those free-for-alls. Do what you want with it. But those are some places that you'll find me. And I will also mention one other thing that I should have added here that I just didn't. It is GRIP, the Genealogical Research Institute of Pittsburgh. So if you are in the Pittsburgh area or the states around Pittsburgh, or people fly in from other parts of the country or the world, there is an institute in Pittsburgh. We have a week that's virtual where I'm doing an organization week, organize your genealogy and your DNA, and that's virtual. And so you can attend in your pajamas. That's fine. Just don't turn your video on. And then we have an in-person course we're doing in July. And the July course is a hands-on DNA course. So we're doing a lecture and then a practice with your own stuff, and then a lecture and a practice with your own stuff. And that one's in person in Pittsburgh at La Roche College. So if you need any further information about any of that, you have my email in the handout. You can email me, or you can just look for GRIP online. So I'm so excited to take questions. So we've got a few minutes left. So let me go ahead and stop sharing the screen if that's okay.
Early in the talk, you said you were talking about knowing which segments you share with someone else. So like which segments you share with a match. And someone says, why is this beneficial to know this information?
Well, the shared segments that you have with someone, like let's say you're at Ancestry and they tell you share 400 centimorgans with somebody. And then they'll tell you over how many segments, maybe over 15 segments. And that gives you kind of an average idea of how much per segment average, that you share. But the total amount represents closely your relationship. But the segments themselves and the segments that you match other people to are giving you that direct ancestral line. So let's say Sarah and I on chromosome number 10 share a 20 centimorgan piece that goes from here and it ends over here. And this piece of DNA we have in common, and we also have in common with 20 other people. We probably inherited that same piece from the same ancestral couple, all of us. So that's why it's beneficial, and it's particularly beneficial if you have endogamy, to be able to identify which family line those things came from, because endogamy is so hard to untangle. So segment information is not where you start. Shared matching, like we did tonight, is where you start, but you might find yourself in segment land if you find that you have a lot of endogamy.
Someone asks if you know any updates on the 23andMe situation, whether they're going to allow us to do shared matching anytime soon. I don't know if you know anything about
Yeah,
that, but I don't.
I
Yeah.
don't have any pipeline to them. I do know over the weekend they opened up the ability to download your raw DNA again. That was disabled for a while. So that is back in play. I don't believe that downloading your match lists or some of the shared matching things have come back online. The best place to follow really is Blaine Bettinger's Facebook group. If you're on Facebook, the Genetic Genealogy Tips and Techniques, there's always somebody there who's right on it, and as soon as the email goes out, 20 people are like, hey, you guys, it's available again, so there are some things at 23andMe that you can download now, and you should. So go to the settings and download like the phenotype charts, your traits and your health information, and all the things that you can download. You should be going there and downloading. That's just good practice for us to kind of keep checking up on those things.
Someone says, can you use the Leeds method to go further back for like a third great grandparent? And
yeah, maybe.
probably. Yes.
Yeah, you can. So the reason we start in that 400 to 90 range is because we really want to identify the 4 grandparent lines before we start talking about 8 great grandparents or 16 potential second great grandparents. So yes, you can go lower to those benchmark levels for the second, third, fourth cousin levels and do that. It's increasingly more complicated. And really, autosomal DNA, third great grandparents, is about the accuracy line there. You really don't want to go much beyond that with DNA, because then you're in the land of small segments, multiple relationships, lots of other challenges. So yeah, yes, you can, but do some of the regular work first in that great grandparent and grandparent range.
You already kind of touched on this, but somebody says, will endogamy cause you to not be able to do the Leeds methods? And yeah, I
Yeah,
think
yeah. And the clustering tools, same thing. You're going to have problems. You're going to see big boxes. You're going to see a lot of overlap in gray, and you'll realize all of a sudden you're like, oh, I have endogamy. There
Got
are
it.
other techniques that you use for endogamy. And so stay tuned. I'm sure there'll be a program here eventually where they talk about endogamy and some of the tricks that you can use there, but you really have to have segment data. So you really can't be doing it at Ancestry.
This person says, 3 of my 4 grandparents did not have siblings. Will the Leeds method work for me?
It will, but it's going to be more of a challenge because if you have like a single child of a single child of a single child, there aren't cousins, right? There aren't those normal every level of cousins. So it's going to be more challenging. So start with the 400s down to 90s. If you don't have very many matches, expand it a little bit, go down to about 50 and try it that way. But still remember, you're not getting grandparent lines, you're getting great grandparent lines or second great grandparent lines at that level. So the further you go out, the further back in time you're going with the ancestors.
Somebody was saying that they got lost when you were talking about Pat Matt and Matt Pat. Like,
Right?
what was the significance of those
Okay,
designations?
so I don't write out paternal and maternal every time I use those words because they're long. And sometimes, if you're going back 3 or 4 generations, it's your mother's father's mother's mother, So I just use Matt and Pat as abbreviations. So in that case with my husband, the Pat Matt would be my husband's father. So Pat, Matt, my husband's father's mother. And so Matt would be my husband's mother's mother. So it's just going back a generation. Each one you add is going back one more generation. But I realize that's confusing just to kind of say it, woo, right up front. But
All
the
right,
Pat
yeah.
Matt's just something that I do because I don't want to write it over and over. So,
Somebody says, what is the advantage of adding matches into a spreadsheet or a chart versus just sorting and organizing the dots on Ancestry?
great question. So that is a matter of preference. For the way that Diane Souther teaches it is with the dots and with building genetic networks with the dots. I have trouble visualizing all of my networks at once doing that. And so, by looking at all the different colored dots that are assigned to somebody. So I do the chart so that I really have something that's kind of a work in progress. And I'm adding tree information, I'm adding notes to it. I'm adding notes to myself like, hey, I can't figure out who this guy is. Look on social media for this guy. So I'm using it really as a work in progress. The dot system doesn't quite work like that. Although there are notes fields and you could do something similar in the notes field, but that's probably the reason why I choose the spreadsheet over the dots. And I also have some visual problems. I have a corneal dystrophy that my vision is blurry a lot. And so when I'm looking at all those dots, I mean, even though I'm not colorblind or color deficient, I have trouble with the dots because they all look, they're fuzzy. So I just normally do the Leeds method and then I can upsize the spreadsheet to deal with whatever my vision problem is of the day. So that's probably why I default to that.
How come we don't use over 400 centimorgans matches in the Leeds method?
Because 400 centimorgans lead us to 2 grandparents usually. So if you share over 400, you're probably either a half or a full first cousin. So if you're half first cousin, that's only 1 grandparent line. But if you're a full first cousin, they would show up as 2 grandparent lines, and they're not going to split your networks appropriately. So that's why we start at 400 because that's the low point of I think it's like 404 or something like that is a low point of first cousin, true full first cousin.
Is there a template for the spreadsheet available?
I just make it up in Excel. So you can go back and watch the recording and just add those categories to yours. You can copy me, I don't care.
Okay, I think she meant maybe to download, so she didn't have to create it herself.
Oh, I didn't send anything to download now.
I've got a 2-generation adoption situation with a World War II casualty on the other grandparent side. Thoughts, I think she means on how to solve the problem.
Well, or how to solve the multiple problems.
Yeah,
So
the
really
problems.
it's, if you sort all your matches within that range and you come up with lines that you're going to work on and go back and watch the video because I give a really pretty clear list about what do you do next? So you're going to want to build trees out and connect like all the red group, connect all the orange group, connect all the yellow group, to each other and then figure out where you fit. And that's really just the trick to it. That's what the forensics folks do. That's what the genetic genealogists do. And so we just work that whole network and figure out where do we fit in that group of people.
If we did not get to your question, you can send us an email, or you can send Kelly, I guess, an email at, our email is acp or genealogy@acpl.info.
Great.
And so thank you very much, Kelly.
Yes, and let me just say
Good.
a qualifier to send me an
Mhm,
email. Don't send me
mhm,
your email questions and ask me to solve your questions. I can't.
mhm,
I have 2 full-time jobs. But what I can do is if you had a question about how do I find grip,
mhm,
or
mhm.
where is your, your own DNA group or whatever, I can answer those questions. But don't send me your research questions. Have mercy on me, because I'm just going to email you back and say I'm really sorry, I don't have time. So
Yeah. All right. Very good. So thank you for clarifying that. All
sure.
right. So thank you again to Kelly. Someone asks, we did record this. It will be put on our library's YouTube channel in a few weeks after we get it edited. So that is the answer to that question. And thank you all. And
Thank you.
good night.
All right. Have a good night. Thank you.